Now that our DB is up and running and we also have Lombok added to our Eclipse, let's go and implement this function where we actually want to get the product count from the database. We have declared 4 variables here, which represents the driver, class name, URL, username, password. So whoever is creating an object of this class have to supply these dependencies. In our case, Spring instantiates this. So let's ask Spring to pass on these dependencies over here. And the dependencies are supplied using the setter or constructor. I don't have a constructor that takes these parameters, but if I have one, I can actually make use of the same. Let's also add a function here, which is going to be used by maybe many other function, because every function that this DAO will have eventually needs a DB connection. Let's add a private function that returns a java.sql.connection. Let's call it as create connection. And this is supposed to load this driver class name into the VM. Thereby it registers with the driver manager. And then using this URL user password, it's supposed to return a new connection. Eventually, we'll also use DB connection pool, but for the time being, let's make use of this function. So the first code here I might want to write is class.forName driver class name. This is to load the JDBC driver into the VM so that the driver object will be registered automatically with the driver manager. The second line is to return a new DB connection by using driver manager.getConnection. There's a function that takes URL, user, and password. We'll supply the same. Both of them throw exceptions. They are checked exceptions. Let's throw them away from the function. So since there is an error, I can click on that line where there is an error, press Command 1 or Control 1 on Windows and press Enter. It will add the appropriate exception here. Again, I'm doing the same thing. Or since this quick fix came over here, I can click on the add throws declarations over here as well. Now this function being private and not being used, there is a warning, but that will go off as soon as we implement this function. So to implement the function, what we will do is we will create a try with resources block. Let's go here and type try and catch any exception we have. Let's for the time being throw new runtime exception so that we don't have to really worry about what actually is the exception. Now this section here is where we can create some objects. They get automatically closed by the time you exit this try catch block. And this is a good practice. This was introduced in Java 1.7. So the very first thing that I want to declare here is a connection variable. So I'll say here connection con equals to create connection, the function that we just now wrote here. So this function is now being called. We got a connection object. And using the connection object, let's create a prepared statement. Let's call it as stmt equals to con.prepare statement of some SQL. I don't have this SQL. It's a very simple SQL command. So select count of star from products. Then we say here result set rs equals to stmt.execute query. Now, since I declared all these 3 variables in the try block over here, they get automatically closed. So we don't have to worry about the resource leak. Now that we have got that result set over here, we'll say rs.next to make it move to the first record available and the only record, because your select count of star gives you 1 row, 1 column. And what we want to return is a return rs.getLong 1. 1 corresponds to the first and only column that we have in our select statement. But either there is a return value or there is a exception being thrown. So this return is of no use. Let's get rid of that by deleting them. Save it. Now our application is ready. Let's go to our app config where we have created an instance of JDBC product DAO here. Now instead of returning a new JDBC product DAO straight away like this, we will assign this to a variable. Let's call it as DAO equals to. Since DAO has not been declared, it's giving me an error. I'm going to press Command 1 and get a quick fix, press Enter. On Windows, you press Control 1 to do the same thing. Now that I got DAO, I can say here return DAO. But before returning, I would like to initialize some values for those setters. So I'll say DAO.set driver class name. This happens to be org.h2.d capital driver dao.setURL. Now the URL, either you can type it manually or you can copy it from our H2 console. If you're using Mac, you will see that on the menu bar here, there is an icon that says H2 database engine. On Windows, it will be on the notification area at the right bottom. So if you right click on that on Windows or click on that here on Mac, you'll see that there's something called H2 console. When you click on that, it opens the same in your default browser, and now you can copy this from here. So this is my JDBC URL. I come back to Eclipse, paste the same thing over here. This is your JDBC, which is a client protocol. H2:TCP is the server protocol. / server location. Tilde here corresponds to the home directory of your computer. Typically on Unix platforms, that's what it represents. So since this particular file, Spring Training, is there in that particular location, it's picking up from there. So let's also type here dao.setUser, which is SA, and dao.setPassword. Even if it's an empty string, you still have to give, otherwise it will assume null, which is wrong. Now, whenever we ask for JDBC DAO, Spring will call this function, and Spring calls this function means that we are creating an object and returning fully initialized bean object. So this is where the dependencies have been set. And once the dependency have been set, whenever we call the count function, it's making use of this create connection function where the actual dependencies are used at that point in time. Eventually, we get the product count. So let's go to the program that we wrote earlier and then run the same. Make sure that you are getting the JDBC DAO, not the dummy DAO. So when I run the code, you should now see that there are 77 products instead of 100 products, which is actually coming from the database itself.